The skeleton soldier is dying, having failed to protect his owner, Mr. Succubus, who lies bleeding next to him. A soldier decapitates him, and his skull rolls to her corpse. Hoping he could have been stronger and wishing for a second chance, the skull rolls and bites a soldier on the foot before being smashed. As all fades to black, assimilation rate decreases to 94.8%. The skeleton muses on his failure and wishes to rest, being disturbed by an ever louder sound before waking up inside of a coffin in a forest. As he starts to recognize the place, a blue status window pops up, informing that the inheritance is complete, making him a level 1 skeleton with the stats of a level 36, with no name. His thoughts are interrupted by a woman named Rubia claiming she had woken him, and realizing it is the same woman who made him into a skeleton soldier 20 years ago. He realizes he is back to when he first rose. He knows Rubia will soon be killed by bandits, and after some thought, remembering his dead master, he decides to save her and carries her away, finding no point in living if he can't even protect her. A scenario window appears, displaying information on Rubia just before two horsemen approach, prompting No Name and Rubia to hide. One wields a crossbow and the second a great hammer, and No Name realizes they weren't random bandits, but the mercenaries hunting Rubia. After they pass, Rubia starts to explain who she is before being shot by the crossbowman. As the great hammer user approaches Rubia, No Name strikes him in the head with a rock, but the man recovers and deals him a crushing blow to the skull with his hammer, causing him to die again and fail at protecting Rubia. He then wakes up again in the coffin, while Rubia announces herself, much to his confusion. No Name has been raised again with his memories intact, and now faces a memorial window, offering him a bonus of 20 plus goodwill with necromancers or 40 plus blunt resistance. Choosing the latter, he tells a surprised Rubia to hide before the mercenaries arrive, causing her to wonder how he can talk and know this. He then asks for her dagger and vows to protect her as she hides. The mercenaries approach and spread to search for Rubia, and No Name is able to ambush and kill the unassuming crossbowman, leveling up before being smacked. Guys, I've got to tell you about this game I've been playing lately. War Thunder is a vehicle combat game with over 2,000 super detailed vehicles, like tanks, planes, helicopters, and ships that can engage in PvP battles. The models are so impressive, and they have one of the most dynamic and detailed vehicle damage models in gaming ever, which is honestly so cool, because it's not just general hit points, which makes the game much more immersive than most others. You've got vehicles all the way from 1920 till today available, and you can even customize them with anime skins and characters from lots of franchises. Who doesn't want their waifu on their own combat vehicle? Start playing the game today by joining with my link in the description, and you'll even get a super bonus as a new player, with lots of vehicles, boosters, and a special 3D Dakimakura. It's free to play, and all bonuses are available on PC, Xbox Series X and S, PlayStation 5, and the previous consoles too. Make sure to check it out. Smashed in the skull by the Great Hammer user. Though the damage was mitigated by the bonus, it was still too much. The mercenary wonders if there was a dungeon nearby and proceeds to smash No Name to dust, killing him a second time. As No Name rises again, he applies the points he gained from killing the crossbowman to raise his agility. In his third life, he manages to kill the Great Hammer, but he was killed by the crossbowman. Finally, having gained more experience and levels, he is able to overcome and kill both mercenaries in his fourth life, succeeding in protecting Rubia after 3 deaths. As he walks with Rubia in a cave, No Name recaps his situation internally. Every time he dies, he goes back to when he was first summoned, starting at level 1 but retaining his skills and stats and receiving a memorial bonus. And if he experienced something different in his previous life, he gets a new ability. However, he doesn't know how many more times he can revive. Rubia pulls him from his thoughts, explaining that she is the daughter of Lord Ray, an honest and principled man who resisted the new changes imposed by the newly ascended, warmongering king. For this, he was assassinated, leaving Rubia orphaned. No Name recalls that the king will soon launch a massive 9-year-long war to unite all the lands under his rule, followed soon after by the resurrection of the 16 devils. He lacks the power to stop this war, but at least he can protect this girl who's been caught in the middle, though he must become stronger in order to do that, and one day meet his mistress. They agree that they should get to a village and emerge into the mountains. Though Rubia attempts to play with him, No Name points out that skeletons are usually emotionless. They are headed to Ublam, and Rubia suggests buying armor there to hide No Name's nature in order to avoid panicking the humans. She is then saved from slipping to her death, being glad at having No Name there to protect her. After crossing the mountains, they finally reach Ublam, and Rubia decides to enter the town alone while No Name waits outside in order to avoid scaring anyone. She reassures him about her safety and promises to return soon. No Name waits patiently for 3 days wondering about her, and on the 3rd day a door opens as an old man emerges from the castle with a wheelbarrow and dumps something. Memories of his time with Rubia flash through No Name's mind as he approaches her beaten corpse. Looking down at Rubia's corpse, No Name laments failing to protect her as he hears 2 men approaching. They were Rubia's jailers, and state that she committed suicide before they could sell her, causing their superior to beat one of them. One of them departs while the other searches for the corpse, dropping his sword once he finds it and promptly being stabbed from behind with the blade by No Name before he can do anything else. When questioned, the man reveals that the owner of the inn brought the girl to them, and they were following orders from the leader of the guards, after which No Name runs him through. Closing Rubia's eyes, he decides to look for the owner of the inn. That night, No Name approaches the inn, his body covered by a cloak, and kicks the owner inside. Cowering, the man yells that he doesn't know anything regarding the 2 dead organization members who had been sent after the daughter of the Lord of Erst, as he confused No Name with someone else. No Name then informs him about Rubia's fate, and interrogates him as to its cause, stabbing him through the thigh before he can escape. Terrified, the innkeeper states that he merely handed the girl over to the guards, unaware of what would happen, because the leader of the guards has to give girls over to the Necron Society to use as slaves. Before he can say anything about the society, the snake tattoo in his neck comes alive and strangles him. And No Name concludes that there must be something going on between the Necron Society and the Ublam guards. Knowing he must become stronger and remembering Rubia's advice, he dons a suit of purple plate armor. Determined not to lose anyone else, he departs. No Name slices through another skeleton soldier as he enters the Spectre's Charnel House dungeon. It's a small dungeon, and upon realizing that it has fellow skeletons, he removes his helmet and attempts in vain to connect with them, thinking on how pitiful it is to be unable to talk. As he's about to depart, an alert window pops up informing him of the incoming dungeon boss, and he turns around to see a giant, horned skeleton armed with a war mace. The boss smashes one of the dungeon skeletons and beckons the rest to attack No Name, who dons his helmet and engages in combat. He easily dispatches the minor skeletons, dodging the boss's attacks and shattering one of his legs before taking a hit. Knowing of a skeleton's weak points, he then rushes and clambers atop the boss's skull, thrusting his sword and delivering a killing blow. This kill leveled up No Name 5 times and caused a quest window to pop up promising a level 1 swordsmanship for swinging his sword 10,000 times. He reasons that, not having to eat or sleep, he can complete that quest easily, and decides to use the now vacant dungeon as his training ground. Outside the dungeon, a portly knight approaches accompanied by 2 beautiful women, one red-headed and another blonde. No Name continues to swing his sword, managing to raise his count considerably, when an alert window pops up and informs him of the presence of intruders. The portly knight boasts of his power to his female companions, with the redhead playing dumb as he shows her a bag full of expensive healing potions. She is clearly playing the knight, while the blonde woman muses on the situation, concluding that the knight has valuables and the redhead is just trying to get closer because of it. The blonde, whose name is Rena, plans to use the distraction of the monsters to kill and rob the knight. But as she leads him on, the redhead points out that being an adventurer, Rena should take point and do reconnaissance, much to her annoyance. The knight attempts to break the argument, while inwardly lamenting that the dungeon only has weak skeletons and hoping to face a more resilient boss in order to show his cool side and get lucky with both women. Both of these women then point out they should have encountered skeletons by now, which the knight brushes off while inwardly wondering the same thing, until they stumble on the deceased boss and soldier skeletons. The knight is shocked at finding it dead, and just as a frustrated Rena is about to stab him in the back, they are surprised by No Name advancing in full armor. The knight confronts him and scoffs at the redhead's suggestion that it might be a monster, while Rena wonders if it's a skeleton. No Name then bids them to leave as he has taken over the dungeon, prompting the knight to agree while sensing that his opponent has a higher level than himself. As the knight tells the women they should leave, Rena lashes out at No Name for seizing the dungeon and for his manners in not removing his helmet, telling him to surrender his loot or else face the knight. The latter, besotted with Rena, tells No Name to reveal his face, and a smirking Rena muses to herself on taking his stuff too, before all 3 are frozen in shock at finding out he's a skeleton. No Name tells them to leave, and while the redhead realizes that he might not be an average skeleton, the knight dismisses this, and, despite No Name's advice not to, prepares to fight. Trying to show off, he attempts to strike No Name with his blessed morning star, but the latter, having warned them to leave, slices his hands off before he can deliver the blow. Rena is enthralled. As the knight groans in pain, the redhead attempts to flee, before Rena kills her in cold blood with a throwing blade. No Name, believing he was the intended recipient, prepares to fight Rena before the latter asks to be spared. She introduces herself as a member of the T&T Guild, a thieves guild carrying out assassinations, thefts, and information gathering, and she offers her services to No Name. She states that the redhead was her intended target since it would be troublesome for No Name if she got away, and she saved him the trouble of dealing with that woman. No Name, who was not planning on killing the redhead, asks Rena the reason for killing her colleague, to which she replies that she believes he cannot be killed through trickery and that she was her target. No Name then tells Rena to leave and refuses her offer of services, until he recalls that she also deals in information. He asks her about the Necron Society. Rena, glowing at the chance, states that she knows about them and will share the information on one condition, causing No Name to draw his sword. Rena, however, retorts that he would find it hard to find out what she knows without being from the guild, and the guild would not sell it to a skeleton, implying that killing her would prevent him from getting the information he needs. As No Name sheaths his sword, Rena states her condition is that he make her his ally, causing a quest window to pop up detailing the scenario. It presents the perks and warnings of trying to appoint Rena as branch manager of the T&T Guild. No Name thinks on how he still doesn't understand the meaning of these windows or assimilation percentage, but he still needs information. Rena keeps trying to persuade No Name, suggesting she might help with his training, before he lifts her by the neck, pointing out how easily she killed a fellow human and that he doesn't wish to be backstabbed himself. She then screams that she's more like him, and, released, states that humans are only interested in her body, not who she is inside, and they don't think of her as a human, just as they see No Name as a monster who needs to be slain, implying that they're in the same boat. Rena then explains that the Necron Society is a massive shadow syndicate, involved in drugs, contract killing, human trafficking, and other lucrative, illegal activities. It is also backed by several lords and powerful individuals in the Empire, though no one knows where their headquarters are or who leads them. Any further information is reserved to high-ranking guild members. Rena then proposes to bring her targets to No Name's dungeon so he can earn sufficient experience. In exchange, she will rise in the guild and be able to deliver information No Name desires. Hesitant, No Name asks her again if she won't hesitate in helping him kill humans. She confirms, stating that she hates them. He then agrees to the deal. An alert window informs that 3 intruders have appeared in the dungeon. No Name easily dispatches one of them and Rena assassinates the second, before the third kicks her to the ground. Before the third intruder can deliver the killing blow, No Name saves her. After the encounter, No Name's dungeon affinity rises to 19% and his swordsmanship reaches level 4. After months of doing this, his rate of leveling has slowed down. As he considers moving to a new dungeon, a delighted Rena shows him the loot they gathered from all the people they lured. Noting his uneasiness at her eagerness to kill humans, she points out that since the people she gets contracts for are criminals, she gets little money from this, while the criminals avoid getting punished for their many crimes through bribery, and they all deserve to die. No Name notes the books the criminals carried, picking up a volume titled The Unsightly Mage. He starts reading that mages must possess an innate ability to cast magic, and though they enjoy great privilege, they have no responsibility. He wonders if the writer has a grudge against mages, and upon reading his name, Kevin Ashton, out loud, a blue window pops up informing him that his wisdom has risen by 1 point, much to his surprise. He then rummages through the other books, noting that a second book written by the same author also raised his wisdom when he read it. Meanwhile, Rena had been getting ever closer, making him uncomfortable. Having observed him, she offers to find more books for him in the village, but No Name asks her about the closest dungeons instead. As she recalls, there's 1 E-class, 1 D-class, and 2 C-class dungeons within a week's travel on foot. No Name thinks that since the current dungeon is an F-class, an E-class dungeon would be a good next step. He then notices that Rena has fallen asleep on his lap, and as he's about to resume his swordsmanship training, he suddenly feels tired and falls asleep himself. A blue window then pops up. Having spent 182 nights in the dungeon, his dungeon affinity is 20%. He is succumbing to his human nature, and the dungeon is trying to devour him. As No Name opens his eyes, he sees his deceased mistress Succubus, who asks him if he had a good dream, apologizing for waking him up. A shocked No Name jumps to his feet and realizes that he has no armor, being embraced by Succubus. She points out he must have had a nightmare, asking what story she should tell. A relieved No Name reassures himself and thinks that they will live in the dungeon happily for a long time as he is dragged by the hallucination deeper into the caves. Rena wakes up, finding herself alone, wondering where No Name went. Meanwhile, he is deep in his hallucination, lying on Succubus's lap while she reads to him, and starting to believe that everything prior had been a dream, relieved that his mistress is alive. Noting his unease, she closes the book and asks if the story is boring, then tells him to continue talking about his dream and what kind of person Rena was. Outside the dungeon, Rena stretches and realizes No Name isn't out there, and suddenly she notices troops nearby and an officer rallying them. They are there to subjugate the dungeon since, despite supposedly being a light training area, over the previous months, countless adventurers and civilians have disappeared after heading there. And this is the Blue Lion Templars' subjugation. Rena realizes the danger. In the dungeon, Succubus comments on Rena's lively attitude to No Name, and then she asks if he's just gonna let her die just as he left her. This startles No Name just as an alert window informs him an intruder has appeared. Recalling Succubus's death, he is determined to prevent the knights from killing her again. Rena approaches him, warning of the impending danger, but an entranced No Name rises and draws his sword, believing he is protecting Succubus. A worried Rena dodges his attacks and tries to reason with him while also thinking he has been acting strange, as a scout fires a bolt at her feet and alerts his fellow soldiers, calling No Name a monster and her a rumored witch. Rena notes that No Name is not in the right mind and begs him to come to his senses as crossbow bolts rain around her. Lost in his hallucination, No Name tells Succubus of the impending attack and vows to protect her, causing her to doubt it as Rubia appears before him asking why he left her to die. No Name falls back in disbelief as Rubia reminds him of his broken vow. Succubus then tells him he failed at protecting them because he was weak, and both rebuke him for his failure as he sinks deeper into despair. Outside, a soldier approaches the Blue Lion Templar and informs him that the scouts have located their targets. As No Name sinks deeper and deeper, he wishes he were stronger. In the dungeon, Rena takes cover from the bolts, and noticing No Name's state, decides to act. Using a smoke bomb as cover, she grabs No Name with a rope and makes a run for it, planning to lure them deeper into the dungeon in order to escape. She is stopped as a blade grazes her shoulder, soldiers barring her path. Their leader arrests her on suspicion of murdering multiple adventurers and promises to put her on trial. He also accuses her of necromancy as well as he notices the entranced and speechless No Name rise and orders his men to take the monster out first. Meanwhile, No Name's senses fade as he sinks deeper and deeper, concluding that must be the afterlife and glad that he met Succubus and Rubia one last time. However, upon remembering that he should have been resurrected if he was dead, he realizes this is an illusion and that he must wake up. He must get stronger to protect Succubus 20 years in the future. He is a skeleton warrior who protects his mistress, who will protect everyone. No Name wakes up to Rena's bloody face. She stood between him and the soldiers and received 3 arrows to her back. A startled No Name picks her up as she jokes about hearing his thanks if they survive. The commander berates his soldiers, since their orders were to capture Rena alive, and noticing No Name carrying her, tells her to give up, just as she grimly lights a fuse. The commander watches in horror as the lit fuse burns towards a stockpile of munitions that Rena describes as her going-away present. The exploding stockpile is revealed to be poison smoke, and Rena asks No Name to carry her on his back as they escape. Any soldiers that get in his path are swiftly cut down, and he asks Rena why she remained despite that number of soldiers. She replies that she is his ally, causing No Name to inwardly lament being caught in the illusion. As they leave the dungeon, No Name is relieved at not seeing any other soldiers. He is about to break the shafts of the arrows on Rena's back, before seeking more treatment elsewhere, before he hears the Blue Lion Templar stating that reports of Rena being a high-ranking necromancer were exaggerated, before swiftly striking No Name down with his sword. No Name falls, his arm severed by the Blue Lion Templar's blow. The Templar looks at his foe with contempt and asks a surprised lord the reason for wasting his time to capture a weakling like Rena. The Lord explains his belief that she was a powerful necromancer, only to be paralyzed by the Templar's death stare. He attempts to end his life as payment for his sin before the Templar orders him to stop. Having somewhere else to be, he starts to depart, leaving Rena for the Lord to punish at his own discretion after her trial. Suddenly, he turns to face a risen No Name, who wonders who the Templar might be, noticing how he didn't sense him or see him swing his sword, and realizing he's on an entirely different level from all the opponents he has faced so far. No Name wonders if he can win, but seeing the wounded Rena decides that it doesn't matter since he will fight regardless of who he's facing. The Templar dodges his attack, and as the Lord insults No Name for his insolence and orders the recently emerged soldiers to help, a rumble is felt. An alert window pops up, informing a puzzled No Name that the higher-level Blue Lion Templar has used an advanced skill restricting his mobility, as well as that of those in the area. With everyone immobilized, the Templar approaches Rena, wondering how No Name can move, while she lost her consciousness and noting she doesn't look like a high-ranking necromancer. But if he were right, killing her would be beneficial. As he draws his sword to strike, No Name forces himself to move and attempts to attack him, though the Templar dodges the strike and breaks his sword. Noting that the reports weren't completely wrong, he strikes the final blow to the kneeling No Name, killing him for the 5th time. As darkness descends, No Name thinks about Rena and his failure to protect her, comforted only by the thought of going back to the grave in the forest and to see Rubia again. However, he awakes in the dungeon, deeply perplexed at the situation as he recognizes his surroundings and sees Rena sleeping on his lap. The status window informs the inheritance is complete, and now he has the skill of a level 70. No Name and all his stats is heading to the designated waypoint, and his dungeon affinity has dropped to 92.49%. Examining his surroundings, he notes that, while he is alive, he hasn't returned to Rubia, wondering if he will ever see her again. A memorial window informs him he has died 5 times and earned a bonus, upgrading him to Necromancer's Lover, which gives him plus 20 likability with necromancers with whom he has close ties, and an additional 10 with the necromancer with whom he has a working relationship. As he wonders if Rena had been acknowledged as a necromancer, he remembers her taking arrows for him and decides he should repay her. But before that, they should escape the dungeon. No Name wakes Rena up and tells her that they must leave now, knowing that he must exit the dungeon before his affinity increases to the point where he hallucinates and subjugation forces arrive. He decides to go to the next dungeon, planning to head to the arid underground cemetery. But Rena points out that they should head for the ruins of Spider's Vault instead, since the cemetery is completely barren, as if all the monsters there suddenly vaporized. Remembering the subjugation forces, he asks Rena about the Blue Lion Templars. She informs him that they are the 1st or 2nd ranked knightage in the service of the Empire. They are led by the Marquis Vatien von Leandro, who wields the blade Seraphim and is one of the top 4 swordsmen unmatched in the whole Empire. No Name immediately recognizes him as the warrior who killed him, and wonders what brought him to that remote corner of the realm without his knights. Rena then states they must head to a nearby town to gather supplies before heading to the next dungeon, and because she wants to bathe as well. No Name, realizing he hadn't considered her needs, agrees. At dawn, they approach the biggest town in the region, which happens to be Ublam. Remembering Rubia's fate, No Name decides to accompany Rena into town, and she puts a cloak on him before they head for the gate. They manage to get into the town by bribing the guard and pretending to be a married couple, much to No Name's surprise. And as they enter, Rena notices a strong scent of opium despite there being no den nearby. They both realize that the mood is strange, and the townspeople are wary of them. And as Rena playfully leads him in search of lodgings, a dark figure watches them from an alley. No Name and Rena are welcomed into the inn by a beautiful barmaid. As Rena asks for food and lodging, No Name notices she lacks the neck tattoo of the previous owner. The new innkeeper mistakes his stare for something else, much to Rena's annoyance and No Name's confusion. The next day, with Rena well rested, the pair head for the general store, while No Name notes that no one tried to sneak on them, sensing they are being shadowed. The shopkeeper refuses to sell firebombs, antidotes, or Molotov cocktail materials to Rena, being out of stock and unwilling to trade with them, much to the girl's annoyance. No Name, still wary of being followed, drags a furious Rena out of the store, and the pair manage to sneak on the man shadowing them, recognizing him as the town's blacksmith. The man bids them to follow him, stating that it is dangerous to keep wasting time in the town. At the smithy, the 3 start talking. The blacksmith deduces that the pair was headed to the ruins of Spider's Vault from the supplies Rena needed, and explains that she wouldn't find them in town, since the Lord of Ublam and his guards are raising spiders for unknown reasons and the town is dying. As he recounts, after the previous lord died under mysterious circumstances, the new lord replaced the guards with brutes, and the town became addicted to opium, selling their property cheaply to the lord in order to buy more drugs. Those who disobeyed or questioned the lord, including the blacksmith's wife, were fed to the spiders. He then tells No Name to get revenge in his place, recognizing the armor he is wearing as one of his works, having been purchased by Rubia for someone dear to her. He proceeds to tell an enraged No Name that lonely tourists become targets, and that he did nothing because he was a coward and, being old, couldn't save Rubia himself. Informing No Name that the captain of the guards should be taking the criminals to the cavern now, he gives them a vial of Grasmir's flame, a flame from the sea that never goes out, so he can burn down the guards and spiders. Chained prisoners are led to the ruins of Spider's Vault while being trailed by Rena and No Name. As they approach the dungeon's entrance, Rena asks who should carry a flamethrower-like weapon. In a flashback, it is revealed that the blacksmith is from Grasmere, the town of blacksmiths, and Grasmere's flame is very rare, with him only being able to make a single vial. This must be used with that weapon, and once started, the fire will never go out, being kept in the bottle only through magic, and having the same power as a blast furnace. The smith gave them the weapon as well as flame-resistant powder, stating that he'd rather have them use it to get rid of the guards than to use it himself for his craft. With Rena holding the flamethrower, they head inside the caverns, with No Name noticing how quiet and maze-like the dungeon is. Rena interrupts his thoughts to ask him about Rubia and what she meant to him, with No Name cutting her short, stating that she meant nothing and the armor was needed for their mutual benefit. But he failed to keep his promise to protect her. As No Name wonders which path to take, a nervous Rena hands him a pendant, stating that it is a precious item to her and she is lending it to him. Before he can refuse, No Name notices something sticky dripping onto his helmet, and turns to face an incoming giant spider. Rena sounds the alarm before being caught by a web and hoisted upwards while the spider strikes at No Name. He unsheaths his blade and cuts off the creature's leg, but is ambushed from behind by a second spider that pins him to the ground as he tries to hold it at bay. As Rena cries for help, No Name manages to regain his sword and dispatch the spider, and stands up to face an incoming wall of creatures. Rena recognizes the gravity of the situation as she dangles upside down and the spiders approach her. Meanwhile, No Name keeps hacking at the spiders in the ground, parrying and dodging their attacks as they keep coming, until several spiders shoot their web at him, rendering him immobile. A spider approaches and is about to finish him off before suddenly bursting into flames. A surprised No Name turns to see a deranged Rena holding the flamethrower, and apologizing for her tardiness before proceeding to torch the spiders. She torches a spider that attempts to ambush her and compliments her weapon, noticing that the spiders are retreating further inside the dungeon. After she frees No Name, the two follow the spiders, torching any that dare cross their path. And as a blue window pops up, No Name notes that combat experience yields a faster rate of leveling. Rena teases No Name before collapsing, with the latter realizing upon inspection that she's been bit and needs an antidote. At the heart of the dungeon, a group of soldiers try to drive the Spider Queen boss back with their torches, and No Name assumes that they must have antidotes, wondering why would they attempt to raise monsters. The captain of the guards, sporting a snake tattoo on his neck, warns the queen to behave, else they burn her eggs to a crisp. Recalling Rubia, No Name clenches his fist in anger as he sees the captain of the guards. A newbie soldier asks another why they bring the criminals there before being told to shut up. He is then held at sword point by No Name, who presents a startled captain with the choice to hand over the antidote in exchange for a painless death and sparing his men. The captain laughs at this and wonders if No Name is a druggie for doing this, prompting the latter to explain that he is here to avenge Rubia. Unmoved, the captain smirks and remarks that he doesn't even remember her among his countless victims, causing No Name to release his hostage and lunge at him before being hit by a bottle of spider egg yolk. This causes the Spider Queen to impale No Name through the chest, seeing him as an intruder who stole her egg. The captain then comments that it is believed the queen was a chimera created and abandoned by mages, and that she protects her eggs with a maternal bond. Snickering, the captain turns to depart, just before the queen erupts in flames. As he turns back, he is confronted by a helmetless No Name, wielding the flamethrower and pouring heat-resistant powder on his head, before unleashing the flames on his men while promising him an agonizing death. Spiders are torched by No Name as they approach him, while the soldiers, eggs, and everything flammable burns. As No Name approaches him, a burning captain begs in vain for his life before being burnt to a crisp. No Name continues to burn everything in rage, unaware of Rena and the fact that he is starting to melt until he collapses and dies, his assimilation rate dropping to 90.14% as darkness descends.